Hello, my name is Harold Mendelson, and this paper will explain the beginning of the Puritan sect of the Protestant religion in the Massachusetts Bay Colony from 1628 through 1725, and Cotton Mather, the religious leader of the Boston Old North Church from 1686 through his death in 1728. I will delve into the impact the Puritans and Cotton Mather had on the Massachusetts Bay Colony and the impact that the Massachusetts Bay Colony had on the Puritans and Cotton Mather. The research I have conducted is listed in the bibliography and footnotes provided. Basically, in my case, I initially was going to start just with Cotton Mather, but I found that he was so intertwined with the Puritans, as he was a minister of that church or denomination of Protestant faith, and how he started off as a very conservative minister. In fact, at one point in his life, he was extremely frustrated because he wanted to become the president of Harvard University and carry on the position his father had up until he retired in 1705. Now, Cotton Mather had tried several times to become the president, and he was rejected on each one. Now, why was that? He was obviously a well-known author. He wrote over 630 books and pamphlets. He was well respected within the Puritan sect, and he ran one of the most famous churches in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, one that would also gain fame, and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's deal about Paul Revere, and when he rode through Boston and supposedly had the lights shining from the tower of the church. Basically, my research went into the usual research through the Jerry Falwell Library, and I found it very advantageous for me to look directly on the internet and actually reference some of the wiki database articles on Cotton Mather and the Puritans. They did something that a lot of other research material I found didn't do. It tied everything together, and it was fairly well researched. I also found that over time, that Cotton Mather and the church affected the Massachusetts Bay Colony. It believed in hard work, and if you could make a profit, that was so much the better. They believed in piety. They had strict rules about public disturbances. They had very definite ideas on their connection with the colony government, which was very positive. In addition to that, I found that it had evolved over time. Harvard started out as a school. Because of the way the laws were written up in England, they couldn't actually start a university. They had to be content with starting a school, and that was done. And his father not only went to school there, he also was in charge of that for a number of years, and he went there. In fact, he was one of the youngest, and at the time, the youngest persons ever to entered the school at the age of 12. His tenure there was not without strife. Being the youngest, he was being constantly picked on by people. A couple of the individuals he would have impact interaction with for the rest of his life. And it was sort of a very leery relationship as far as he was concerned. He was definitely very conservative initially, but over time, he was married 3 times. He had 15 children, only of which 5 lasted through childhood. And his one son that he named after his father actually went off the beaten track, got involved with a lot of the things that the Puritans didn't believe in. He started smoking and drinking. He hung out and was involved with a number of prostitutes. He became interested in going to sea, which his father was extremely unhappy with. Finally got him to stay ashore for a while, and initially he was trying his hardest to overcome his bad influence, and unfortunately he fell back into that, and he felt in the end that the only way he could get away with this is to go back to sea, where he had nothing to do but hard work all day, and you didn't have time to get in trouble. Unfortunately, his ship ran into bad weather and was sunk, and he was lost. And that kind of really upset his father and sent him back. But he eventually pulled himself out and continued. He also had some dealings with the witch trials of Salem. While he wasn't directly involved, he certainly wasn't involved in prosecuting any of the people who were accused of witchcraft. But he had an influence because his belief in witchcraft is that it existed and that it was the work of the devil. And he wrote essays about this and was conferenced at times by the prosecution, even by the judges. In the end, a number of people were executed. This whole thing started around 1685 with the Goodwin family. The Goodwin family was a very pious family, and they would go to church, which was a Puritan church, every Sunday. And while they were in church, their children were to be an equivalent of a Sunday school. And one such Sunday, the oldest, a young girl, named, I believe her name was Martha, she had a confrontation with their family's washerwoman. Apparently she was stealing some of the linens, and Martha accused her of that. Well, this woman happened to be an Irish Catholic, and she started screaming at Martha, and of course it was in Gaelic, but it was obvious that it was not nice things being said to her. She got hysterical, and her siblings also became hysterical, and they got so loud that it actually disturbed the church service, and it disrupted it. And so they came next door to see what was going on, and they had found all of their children were hysterical. And when the daughter explained what they did, they of course went to the washerwoman and started accusing her. And it turned out that she had an old mother that was poor, and she was taking these linens to her to give her something to sleep on or with. And Now the woman, the grandmother was, or the mother of the washerwoman, was basically accused of witchcraft. This was her answers to things. She was kind of boisterous, and for whatever reason, and so she was put on trial, found guilty, and was hung. This didn't happen right away. This happened in 1793, 1693, 1694 time frame. And that was the start of a witch hunt, so to speak. A number of people were accused. Some were either charged with, ended up being charged with lesser charges. Some were banished. Some were found not guilty, and some were found guilty, and in extreme cases they were executed, most by hanging. One person was burned to death and another one was pressed to death. That's where they take a huge rock and they put it on your body while you're laying down. And it crushes your chest, stops you from breathing. It's, they could have just shot him and it'd been over with, but no, that was not the way they were going to do it. Well, the rest of the colony, Massachusetts Bay Colony, that was not Puritan, kind of looked upon this as like, what are you guys, nuts? They thought that witchcraft doesn't exist. They didn't believe in it. And they felt it kind of bad that the Puritans were hanging people and executing them for being witches. Although he wasn't involved, and he actually wrote stories up. In fact, this girl Martha, after the incident, he took her into his home, and kind of examined her and talked to her and went through research and decided at the end that this was a case of mass hysteria. She got excited and started screaming because she was being yelled at, and all her siblings started doing the same thing. They were just screaming because their sister was screaming. Not only was Cotton Mather, an excellent student, by the time he was 12, he was fluent in both Latin and Greek, and had no trouble passing the entrance exam, and did graduate not only with a bachelor's degree, but he went on to get a master's degree. He was ordained in 1686 by his father in the Old North Church, and he continued to work with his father until his father died, and then he continued onward by himself. Later on in life, he kind of had some regrets over the fact that of his opinions on the witchcraft, but that kind of not only stuck with him, but it also stuck with the Puritans. And as they were also an evangelical church, and they found that they would bring in a lot of people. They even had Native Americans and blacks, both free and slaves. In fact, slaves could have been white too, and then they were also given the opportunity to join. In the end, as he started bringing in people that were not original Puritans, they kind of brought their opinions with them, and they kind of modified what the church was and what the beliefs were over time. And Cotton had seen this because when his son was planning to go to Harvard, he started investigating and seeing that the students and the faculty was kind of becoming too loose. They were going out to entertainment, looking at plays, drinking and smoking, practicing debauchery at every opportunity, something that we look upon today as being fairly, if not normal, at least understood. He tried his best to stop this, and this is why the elders or the board at Harvard would not appoint him as president because of his ultra-conservative views. In the end, he was reflecting upon his life. He had some regrets. Obviously, losing his son was one. His first two wives passed away from illness, one from childbirth and the other one from, I believe it was, one of the diseases that was highly contagious. He also studied that. He found out that if he stuttered as a young man, and he felt that if that prevented him from being a minister, that at least he could become a doctor. And so he also studied medicine. And he wrote several books and pamphlets on the subject. It was smallpox, I believe, that killed his one wife, and he was very much in favor after that of getting inoculations to prevent you from coming down with that disease. The Native Americans that he and others had brought into the church, Waban was one, and he was what they call the leader of 50. He had a small tribe, and he studied the ways of Christ, and he included that in his life, but like most Native Americans, it was in addition to what their beliefs were and not in place of. And this was very frustrating among those that were going out and trying to practice evangelism and convert these people to the Puritan Navy. In the end, my research was, I thought, fairly involved. I found a lot of research items through the Jerry Falwell Library, and found them to be most helpful, particularly on the matters of wampum, as far as the church goes, and also as on witchcraft as far as Cotton Mather went. And found that in some cases, people who didn't like their neighbors for whatever reason would just claim that they were witches, and they would make up stories about it. Sometimes it caused them to be tried and convicted. Other times they were found not guilty. So, there were mistakes on that part. I mean, it's human nature. If you don't like somebody, you talk against them. As far as other things are concerned, I'm not a religious person particularly, and I enjoyed researching and finding out about the Massachusetts Bay Colony, how it was formed, the people involved, people like John Cotton, and also the impact of the Glorious Revolution, the impact of King Charles I and King James II, and King Charles II as well. These people were involved. Also, you had the revolution where King Charles I was finally defeated, and 2 years later he was hung. As the people started to evolve, they found that they were more interested in personal liberties, being able to think for themselves, this was something that the Puritans were kind of iffy on. When they would give a service, there would be Bible verses involved, and the sermons were based on that. And they would basically tell the people attending the church service, this is the service, this is the Bible verses we're going through today, and this is what they did. And they would define that and explain it. Now, there was someone in the church, and I'll give you an example of Ann Hutchinson, who was a follower of John Cotton, who believed in a process where he felt that people had the right to have direct intervention with God rather than have to go through someone else. And they could interpret by becoming in contact, personal contact with him through prayer. And this was kind of a pretty radical approach. Ann Hutchinson firmly believed in that. She also firmly believed that women had a higher place in the church. She was kind of a Susan B. Anthony of the 17th century, early 17th century. She would eventually be banished and moved to Rhode Island. But in the course of her, while she was preaching, she would bring people after church. Initially it was women, and would bring them into her house. They were fairly comfortably off. And she would say to them, you know, you women have the equal position in life. You shouldn't be second string citizens. You should have a mind of your own and be able to express your own thoughts. Most of the women that picked up on that idea didn't make their husbands very happy over that. This was a radical change. Up until the 20th century, most women didn't have the right to vote. They didn't have the right to own property. It was kind of like they were second-class citizens. The concept of the women at that time was barefoot and pregnant and being home and tending to the family and keeping the house clean and cooking the meals. And the husband's job was to provide the food, the clothing, the materials, and any money needed. And that's the way it was. And I grew up at a time when it started out being like that and eventually evolved. We had the sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s. It was interesting. I worked down in the Wall Street area, and it was very conservative down there. And I had to go to a meeting up in Midtown, and I was amazed when I got out of the subway that all these women were walking up and down the street going to work, and they had see-through blouses with no bras on. And I'm going, what? You know, I had a hard time accepting that, but, you know, that's the way it was, the way of the times. So I can look back at what they felt like and understand that and accept that. We seem to cycle through those kinds of sessions. Anyway, to get back to this, we have even later on, even after the Puritans kind of evolved in the Congregationalists. In fact, John Cotton named the religion as Congregational, but he looked at it from a Puritan standpoint, and then eventually it morphed into the Congregationalist church. What it did instill was respect for law, work hard, believe in God, and lead a clean and healthy life. Also support the local government. And so they worked hand in hand with the Massachusetts Bay Colony government. They kind of got along well together. It was kind of a symbiotic relation. In the case of Anne Hutchinson, she stood two trials. She stood one trial in civil court where she was banned from the colonies because of her comments that were being considered to be disruptive. And then secondly, before she was leaving, she had to stand trial in the church. And a 3-day trial in there, and she held her own. But you might want to say that she was going against a stacked deck. I mean, the people who would decide her faith would actually pretty much convince her that before the trial started. But she got a few licks in there, and she was also excommunicated from the church. Eventually, like I said, she and her family moved to Rhode Island. Anyway, that's what I found, and hopefully this will work for you. I appreciate it, and you have a good evening.